let's say like March Madness, you'll be like, okay, the Gist fandom, we're going to create our own bracket and we're going to have you all compete with each other. Go sign up with your username and email address and fill out your bracket. And at the end of this, we'll produce a ranking or something like that of where you ranked against all other fans or something like that.
Yeah, exactly that. And then we create an ecosystem of content around it. So we're able to kind of talk about who still has a perfect bracket, how to fill out your bracket, what matters with March Madness. And what's really cool is that the early data that we have from our audience is that they're more likely to continue watching and engaging with a sport when they filled out a bracket, even if their favorite team falls off. And so I think that's really interesting as well for us to ensure that we're getting continued engagement throughout those points, but also for some of our partners that are the broadcast partners or that are the leagues, us being able to show that we can influence fandom and influence fan behavior is pretty cool.
Hello. I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. When Ellen Hislop and her co-founders launched The Gist in 2017, none of them had worked in media or the sports industry. They were young professionals in financial services who had grown frustrated with the sports media ecosystem that largely catered to men while overlooking millions of potential female fans. What began as a side project built during evenings and Sundays has since grown into a sports media brand with more than 1 million newsletter subscribers, hundreds of thousands of social followers, a podcast, paid community, proprietary games, and partnerships with major advertisers. In a recent interview, Hislop explained how scrappy marketing helped attract the Gist's first subscribers, why social media became an important source of revenue, and how the company is expanding into a paid community and launching its own games. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, gently tap on that subscribe button so you can watch more interviews with the world's most successful media entrepreneurs. Okay, let's jump into the interview. Hey Ellen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Simon. I'm excited to be here.
So super excited to talk to you. You run a company that I've been kind of following as a media analyst for a little while. It's called The Gist, and we're going to get into talking about that. But I always like to hear about the founders' backgrounds beforehand, and I'm always interested in looking at their LinkedIn and say, okay, what were they doing before then that could give me clues to what they ended up launching? And I looked at yours and your co-founders, and it looks like you didn't really have any kind of media background before. I'm guessing both of you had some kind of athlete or sports background, but yeah, I'd love to start there. What was, I know you launched in 2017, so let's talk about the pre-2017 days. What did you go to college for? Or like, what was your career trajectory prior to founding The Gist or co-founding The Gist?
Definitely have no prior experience in media, no prior experience in sports. We all studied business. So we went and studied commerce at Queen's University in Canada. And after university, we were all working in different areas of financial services. So I was working in insurance, JC was working in management consulting, Rosalind on the accounting side of things. And we did all really enjoy our careers and our jobs. And I think what we experienced, though, as young women working in finance and some very male-dominated fields really helped us understand our future audience so much more and helped us come up with the idea of The Gist. And so, yeah, really nothing in sports.
So it sounds like at university, all three of you were like friends, and then you just kind of kept in touch after you graduated. Is that what you were saying?
Yes. Yeah. We all met, I think in our very first year of studies. We were all friends throughout university. And then exactly that, we all moved to Toronto after school and all started working in, again, different areas of financial services.
And were you all athletes, or like was something you bonded over with sports, or what was the kind of sports connection?
Yeah, we all had a little bit of a different story. JC and Rosalind grew up playing competitive sports, different sports, whether it was tennis or soccer, what have you. I grew up also playing really high level sports, especially soccer and figure skating. But for me, I have always identified as a massive sports fan. I cannot remember my life without being obsessed with sports. Honestly, since I was about 3 years old, my first ever word was ping, like the sound of a golf ball. So I've always been obsessed with sports. And that was, I think, potentially the differentiator and part of the reason why we came to the idea of something like The Gist too.
And can you just state their full names just so my listeners know?
Yes, Rosalind McClarty and JC DeHoop.
Yeah. And so you founded in 2017. This was firmly kind of in the morning brew era when there were just tons of like niche newsletters that were trying to be the morning brew of X. So walk me into like the months leading up to the launch. What were the discussions happening? Like obviously there's a larger macro story here about coverage of women's sports and how historically it just hasn't received as much balanced coverage as like men's sports. So I'd love to just hear kind of like what the conversations were between you three in terms of realizing there's a gap in the market and why it could specifically be serviced by a newsletter.
I think that there's probably two different ways to answer this question. One is kind of the origin story of the Gist and how we came up with the idea. And then I think the second part is more so how we came up with the business model and kind of looked at the market as well. So as I kind of mentioned, and as you mentioned as well, Simon, we were in our mid-20s, working in the corporate world. We were all remaining friends. I'd actually recently torn my ACL playing soccer. And so we decided to get together for some takeout and white wine one night. And it was during that conversation where we started talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs and how they were going to be back in the playoffs that year, how big of a deal it was for me as a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. And both JC and Roslyn had a moment where they were both like, this would have been really helpful for me to know today as I was meeting people at work and in my life who are big Leaf fans. Everybody was talking about it. But also second, they said, this is one of the most fun conversations I've ever had about sports. I haven't really felt that connected to a sports conversation from a media side of things until now. And I kind of said, that's funny. I have friends chat with me all the time, helping them make their NFL pick'ems or their fantasy or be chatting about sports or what have you. And it really was a realization in that moment where it was basically like, okay, Roslyn and JC were feeling that in that conversation. I was talking about how so many of my other friends are kind of approaching me, and it dawned on us in that moment that if they were enjoying that conversation so much and other people were, that there might be a white space and an opportunity there. We were at the time subscribers to the Skim, subscribers to the Hustle, subscribers to the Morning Brew. It was very much of that era. And that's how we got our news. We were, again, mid-20s. We weren't paying for cable at that time. We weren't a traditional kind of sports fans in that way. And so we opened up a Google Doc that night as we opened up another bottle of wine and basically just wrote down all of our ideas for the Gist. We woke up the next morning and texted each other and we were like, wait, we actually think that this could be something. So that was February 2017. Essentially, for the rest of 2017, we dedicated every single Sunday to working on the Gist as our side hustle. And we put back on our business school hats as we looked at the opportunity in the white space. And Simon, what we found on the sports side of things was twofold. So I think the first, we looked at all of the data and the numbers in the sports world. At the time, only 18% of sports journalists were women, less than 5% of sports media coverage were on women, over 75% of ESPN's viewership was men. And we looked at that and we said, that seems so wild to us considering sports are supposed to be for everyone. And at the same time, what a great business opportunity because they're leaving out so many women. And no wonder when you look at who's on TV and who's creating the content, why so many women and other underserved sports fans feel left out. And then the other side, really, Simon, when you looked at the sports industry at that time, was it was very much an exclusive community where someone in a suit was speaking at you. You had to pay to have cable. You had to pay to listen to the podcast. You had to pay to have a subscription to The Athletic. It really felt like it was this thing that you had to have entryway into this gated community. And we really wanted to flip that. And so as we started looking at the business model, we thought, again, how can we make this very digital forward? Because for us in our 20s, that's how we were consuming all of our news and all of our information. How can we meet our audience where they're already scrolling? Well, at the same time, could we flip that traditional sports media model on its head? So could we create content that was fully created by women? Could we center on an underserved sports fan, and for us, mostly a female fan? And could we actually cover men's and women's sports equally and start to really talk about women's sports in a meaningful way? So that was our kind of thesis after looking at the market and kind of thinking about the business case. And that gave us the jumping off point to go from there.
And so those few months, like it's not like you launched something right away. That was just all kind of market research to start with.
Yeah, it was a lot of market research. It was a lot of, we were not a group of people that kept our idea quiet. We chatted with everybody. We wanted everyone's ideas. We wanted everyone's feedback. We were speaking with our target audience, being like, hey, how do you feel about sports? What's your relationship with sports? Does this seem like something that would potentially work for you? And then once we kind of created the business case for it, we were looking into things. Then we started creating content for our website. We hired a designer. We were getting ourselves up and running on MailChimp. And then in December 2017, we had a launch party in Toronto. And that's really where things started kicking off.
Yeah, I wish I had done a launch party at some point, because I think every media company should have some kind of launch party.
Totally.
Get your initial subscribers, even if it's just like a way to just kind of rally yourself to do something. But
for sure.
But so you launched in December 2017 on MailChimp, and I'm assuming you three didn't quit your jobs right away or anything like that.
No, not right away. So we launched, again, December 2017, massive party. It was awesome, Simon. We had over 250 people. Shopify let us use their space for free. We had all of these sponsors already wanting to come into the Gist. And immediately, to your point, we had 250 subscribers. And our ask was, forward this to your friends the next day. So then immediately we had 1,000 subscribers, and it just started growing and growing. It was completely a side hustle, again, something that we worked on in the evenings every single Sunday. And that was until we actually got accepted into the Facebook Journalism Project that was put on by the DMZ and now TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University. And it was essentially an incubator program where Facebook awarded 5 teams across Canada $100,000 in non-dilutive funding, $60,000 in Facebook ad credits, 6 months at the incubator, along with all of this mentorship. And JC Roslin and I, when we were applying for this, we said, okay, if we get into this program, we are dedicated to quitting our jobs and trying to have a run at the Gist full time, because we're never going to have this opportunity again to be able to work with the likes of Facebook, all of these mentors, and non-dilutive funding. Thankfully, we got in, and that really kickstarted the Gist.
How long was it running before you got into that?
So official launch December 2017, but we started working on it February 2017. We left our jobs, and that program started in May 2018.
So you were running it for like a full year before then?
Yeah, a year. Well,
sorry. No, so you launched it in February 2018, and you quit your jobs in or you got into the program in May 2018.
Yeah, we launched in December 2017, but we had been working on it probably since March 2017, and then we quit our jobs in May 2018.
Okay, so the newsletter was only running for a few months before you quit your job. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So it was really, when we were putting together a pitch deck, it was very Shark Tank vibes. Again, very business school, super helpful to be doing that. Had to include all of these projections based off of 1,000 subscribers of what we could turn into, and that's really when we looked at so many other companies in the market, and we're like, yeah, we could be this one day, or we could be even bigger or better potentially too.
Yeah. And so to start with, it was weekly? Yes. And so how did you divide and conquer in those early days? Because it's just you three. You both had full-time jobs for those first few months. Like what? Because, years ago I ran this like podcast recommendation newsletter, and it took away, I ran it for like a year or two. I think it was like a year. And it took away all the pleasure of listening to podcasts, because I felt like rather than just listening to the podcast I wanted to listen to, I had to, do the spread of cover as many podcasts as possible.
For sure.
I'm sure you three had your sports that you liked to watch, but now you're running this sports newsletter, and you had to cover a much wider field of sports. You also had day jobs, sports. I mean, I'm guessing you didn't have to actually watch every single sport, but you had to be like made aware of a much bigger ecosystem. So it just seems like a lot to bite off for as a side hustle to cover like all of women's and men's sports. So how did you kind of prioritize in those first early months?
It was definitely a lot to take on. I think at the same time, the thing is, Simon, sports was my life for fun anyway. And so I was consuming sports content regardless. So the way that we broke it up essentially was that Roslyn, especially with her accounting background, covered everything finance, operations, technology, all of that. JC with her consulting really focused on partnerships as well as growth. And then I fully focused on content. So I was writing the newsletter, doing our social media, once we launched the podcast, hosting and editing the podcast. And so that's the way that we divvied things up in the early days.
So how did things transform or evolve once you got into that accelerator program?
A lot changed. I think the most important thing that I feel like we learned from that accelerator program was from all of our mentors who really challenged us on the way that we were thinking about things. They challenged us to think a lot bigger. They challenged us to think a lot faster. They challenged us to think more hard about our audience and technology. They challenge us to think about our marketing channels, especially with all of the Facebook ad credits that we received. And so I think that was just an entry point to us into what does startup life actually look like, again, for young women who had only seen the corporate world and very corporate world to that end with some major companies that we were working at. Going from a 400 or 500 person company in Toronto alone and then going to a 3-person startup, we had to really change the way that we were thinking, while at the same time, hopefully carrying on and carrying through some of the best practices that we had learned previously in corporate.
Did you increase the frequency of the newsletter at that point?
Yes, we did. I can't remember the exact point that we did it, Simon, but we went from 1 time a week to twice weekly pretty quickly after we got into that program. And then we also started adding in and testing a lot of different things too. So we were on Instagram, but then we would partner up with other local companies to figure out how to host our first NFL Pick'ems game, or how to host a live chat watching the Toronto Raptors, for example. So we had the newsletter and social, but we were also testing out a lot of different community things. And then we were here and there hosting events. So World Cup watch parties and the whole 9 yards.
So if you look at the history of like Morning Brew and the Hustle and the Skim, and now like companies like 1440, like especially in the early days, they didn't really do a lot of original content. It was mainly kind of curation, but with like a conversational voice. But because they weren't doing original content, a lot of their growth came from kind of arbitrage opportunities and, so-called growth hacking, figuring out how to do really well crafted like Facebook ads and stuff like that to build that kind of early audience. What, in terms of growth for you, I know you got some Facebook credits and stuff like that. How did you grow your audience in those early days?
We were so scrappy, and some of it worked and some of it didn't. So definitely Meta, and Meta continues to be an area where we invest in. In the early days, though, we really didn't have a lot of money. And so we looked at a lot of guerrilla marketing opportunities as well. We would wake up super early in the morning and we would go out and we would spray paint the sidewalks in Toronto, and we would put our Instagram handle on there, and then we wrote leveling the playing field, and we put those all over Toronto. And it's wild, Simon, how many people saw those. Our social media manager, who was with us for 5 years, knew about the gist because she walked out of her apartment building and she saw that. That was really effective. We also would print off these, what we thought would be funny, pithy jokes about sports on little cardstock, and we would take that cardstock and we put it on the subway or the streetcar. We'd put it around the Path, which is the underground network in Toronto. We would also visit colleges and universities across the province, and we would bring those cards, but we would make it a scavenger hunt. So we'd be dropping off these cards for scavenger hunts in all of these libraries. And the only way that someone would actually win a prize is if they followed us and if they shared us and all of that sort of stuff. So we did some wild things like that. We would give out gum and towels, all of that sort of stuff. I remember walking in one of the major parks in Toronto, handing out freezies. Like, we got scrappy to just try to get people to subscribe. And those were some of our stickiest subscribers to this day. So shout out to anyone who took a pack of gum from us and gave us their email. And we were literally, Simon, like typing out their emails in a phone. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't anything like that. And then the other thing that we would do too is that really early days, it was really, I think, an example for us of how we hit the audience nail on the head. There were so many local businesses who wanted to support the Gist because they were somehow associated with sports or with health and wellness, but they didn't have an opportunity to reach women. And so we would do essentially not exactly like a referral program, but similar to it with companies like SoulCycle or Lululemon. So we would talk to the folks at SoulCycle and we would say for the next 2 weeks, when Gisters refer at least 3 friends, them and their referrals all get 2 weeks for free at SoulCycle. We got hundreds and hundreds of subscribers. We were only able to do that because we were reaching an audience that those brands wanted to reach. Lululemon hosted our first ever Super Bowl party totally for free, gave everyone in the audience 20% off all of their clothing. And that's because they wanted the audience that we were speaking to. And so it was also those small things with local partners, but were big brand names that also, I think, showed us, okay, there's value in this audience and people really want to reach this audience too.
What was the growth trajectory of the newsletter? Like, was it just slow linear growth, or were there any kind of like major spikes? Like I know that your official website says that you have north of like 1 million subscribers now. So what did that graph look like?
In the very early days, slow linear growth. And then we decided, so after the Facebook Journalism Project, we were accelerated by Comcast NBCU, Techstars in Philly in the summer of 2019, launched in the US in September 2019. Not great timing before COVID, really hard to write about sports when there was no sports going on, but we did our best. And then we raised some money in 2021. And it was really after 2021 that we finally had more funds to be able to invest in the team as well as invest in the marketing. And that's really where we started getting a lot more sophisticated of thinking about different areas to market the newsletter, to think about our product in different ways, all of that sort of stuff. So I'd say slow and steady, and then meaningful change in 2022, 2023, 2024.
And you mentioned, you had some sponsor interest from that very first party. And I know that you're primarily, we'll talk about the membership thing in a while, but you are primarily like a advertising focus or supported endeavor. So talk about like, how did the ad business grow? What was the kind of interest from brands as you reach like different audience benchmarks and stuff like that?
It's been really cool to see it grow over time, Simon. That immediate interest was really validating for us. And I think that's part of the reason why we even got into the Facebook Journalism Project, because those mentors were like, what? You have 1,000 subscribers and you're already working with people like SoulCycle and Lululemon? It feels like there's so much opportunity here. And so that's really what we found. I will never forget our first ever partner. I think it was Detroit Bikes, and we were all sitting in JC's apartment, and we had 10,000 subscribers at that point, and that would have been just Canada only, so still in 2018. And they came on for a very small sponsorship package, but we were so excited because it was something that was validating, again, the idea. So we started monetizing pretty early, but again, with small packages, local partners to Toronto, testing and learning. And then as our audience scaled, but also as we scale into the US, things really started to change. I think that there has also been some changes in the landscape, especially in the sports landscape over the years, that have changed things for us in particular. First of all, we have seen people finally catch up where there's value in women's sports. And so seeing culture catch up, I think a lot of people in the sports space see us as one of the OGs who bet on women super early. And so there's a lot of people that come to us because they know that we have the trust of this massive audience because we have been doing it for a while. And then at the same time, there was also this proliferation, I'd say, in female fandom, especially with the Taylor Swift effect, and seeing so many women get more interested and be more interested in football. And we had the opportunity to say like, hey guys, we've also been there the whole time too. We've been creating this content for an underserved sports fan for such a long time. And so as the zeitgeist kind of changed, these brands were also like, oh wow, okay, I'm starting to really understand what the Gist is. we used to, Simon, have to really educate everyone, not only on, yeah, we're a newsletter, we're social, we're podcast. That was one thing. But then we also really had to educate on the women's sports landscape. We really had to educate on the female fan versus today, people are like, yep, got it, female fan. Yep, got it, women's sports. Now it's all about how can we show up in the branded content. And so now we have the opportunity to work with brands like, you know, Nike, State Farm, JP Morgan Chase, and it's awesome being able to amplify everything that they're doing in the space. And the content that we have, it's not banner ads. It's not just random placements. It truly is branded content where we know how to speak to our audience. We know our gisters so well, and we really justify the content so that what they are doing in their existing buys is different. They recognize, and so many of our brand partners recognize, that their existing spend in sports isn't necessarily going to be reaching our audience, or if it's reaching our audience, it's not always landing because it's not necessarily made for them. And so it's our job to really take all of their campaigns and ensure that they're landing for our audience, makes sense for our audience, and feels like it's a trusted recommendation from us, because it is at the end of the day.
And did you hire like an ad sales person, or did you go through like an outside network that you partnered with? Like, how did you approach the actual ad sales themselves?
So JC runs our revenue team. And so JC at the beginning, again, when it was just me doing content, JC doing revenue, Rosalind doing growth and ops, JC was really running at all things revenue, us supporting where we could help. And then we hired as we needed to. And so we now have a sales team of 4 folks, and then also integrated marketing team and associate execs who really help out on that side. And again, we think about it less as ad sales and more so how can we actually create programming that is 360, and how can we actually create content that's going to be of value to these folks. And that's where I think we are different than, you know, the Skim or Morning Brew or Marketing Brew or the Hustle, is because we're also in this space that's changing. And we're in this space that is women's sports, is female fandom, that has this messaging tied to it that's different. And sports being, I think, one of the last connectors of people watching TV live or bringing people together IRL allows us to kind of communicate in different ways too.
I feel like the affiliate marketing space has matured recently. Are there opportunities there? Does your team or your company, does it like look for products that it could place in the newsletter when it maybe doesn't have an advertising spot to fill, or you find that there's demand enough to where just the more kind of pure brand deals are kind of the way to go?
Mostly the latter. We haven't really done too much affiliate or CPC. We'll toss it in here and there with a couple of the platforms that we're on, but nothing meaningful.
And so the brand deals, they're not paying on a cost per click basis. They're paying like a set based on a rate card or something like that.
Yeah, we consider ourselves a lot more middle to upper funnel, depending on the brand and what they're looking for, especially because of the messaging and where we're sitting in the space.
Yeah. So I think like a lot of newsletter companies, they kind of treat the newsletter as a minimal viable product and then expand into like a more traditional media company by doing kind of more original content and also other mediums. Obviously you launched a podcast. It looks like you're doing some video on like TikTok and Instagram. Can you talk about how you're thinking about, do you still consider yourself a newsletter company, or do you feel like that's almost like an outdated description of what you are? I notice a lot of these companies, like Morning Brew now has like tons of like B2B niche verticals where they're hiring like actual journalists that are breaking news and doing original reporting. The Hustle now has the entire like Hustle network of podcasts and stuff like that. So what are your thoughts on like kind of the limits of the arbitrage approach to just curating news and then using like growth hacking methods versus getting into like more original content to kind of deepen that relationship and grow with that?
I think for all of these newsletters, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's arbitrage, because I do think that we are all providing context and curation and analysis on everything as well. We're just doing it in a way that isn't long form, and we're doing it on a platform that people are actually reading. And so I think that I'd be careful on that language, I think, of the way that I think of that space.
I guess it has a pejorative kind of association with it. I just mean it more in terms of like, if you're not doing original content, it's hard to grow with curation by itself. It's not impossible, but like, obviously original content like attracts more organic sharing than curation. At least that's like my perception.
Yeah, I think that it all depends on your audience and what they're looking for and the problem that you're solving and the need that they have. I do think that I've rarely share, like, I think that there is some of that on the original side of things, but I think that it's more so for our audience of who are they trusting, where do they want to go, and then we're including all of the links to those places and what have you, but we're also providing the analysis, what it means to us. I think it's the so what and the why and why it matters that's lacking in a lot of original content, that we create that content for our audience. And it's a little bit different in sports where everybody's watching the same game. So like the original content is what's actually happening on the basketball court. What people are kind of putting out after that is all kind of analysis in their own way and curation of what happened in their own way. So it's a bit different in sports. To answer your question, though, I think we consider ourselves a brand, and as opposed to simply a newsletter company. I think in the early days, we would have been mostly looked at as a newsletter company, but we really consider ourselves a brand. We are so proud of our newsletter. That's some of our most engaged gisters that we have. We think that there's still so much opportunity in the newsletter space, while at the same time recognizing that because we're listening to our audience all the time, we have a additional opportunity to create better product and new product for them as well. And so some things that we're thinking about, Simon, to your point, is more original content from the audio perspective, from the video perspective, more original content from a newsletter perspective as well. We think of our audience as having kind of like T-shaped fandom, where right now we're providing a lot of breadth. So in our newsletter, you're getting coverage on the WNBA All-Star Weekend, as well as what happened in F1, as well as what happened in the Athletes Unlimited Softball League. But we're noticing that a lot of our audience wants to know what's happening from that breadth perspective, but it's really deep into one or two sports. And so what does that mean for us in the future in terms of more or original content on the NFL or on the WNBA or on Major League Baseball? We are also thinking about, I'm not sure if you saw this on our site too, Simon, but a big thing for our audience is that they still feel like they're on the outside of the community looking in when it comes to office pools or pick'ems or fantasy or things like that. And so we have really been trying to become the destination for our audience and anyone who feels this way to feel like they can play a game and learn about a sport in the same place. So we've been hosting a lot of brackets for the FIFA World Cup, for example, or March Madness. We'll be hosting weekly pick'ems with the NFL. And so thinking about that engagement beyond, social or wherever else is also what we're interested in. But definitely more on the brand side, because there's so much opportunity, we think, for IRL events. We have barely scraped the surface on that. We really only started testing that out this year. But there's so much opportunity. It's just, okay, how do we want to focus, and what does the future look like from a 1, 3, 5 year perspective of where we're going to place those bets?
Yeah, so on the game side, is that just a bracket they fill out, or are you trying to almost I don't know the sports gaming FanDuel type of ecosystem, but are you trying to kind of take some of that functionality and create your own kind of fantasy draft products and stuff like that?
Yeah, essentially we've developed our own proprietary IP for things like brackets as well as pick'ems. We definitely are staying away from the sports betting side of things. We're partners with FanDuel and DraftKings and BetMGM, and they all do a fantastic job, and we always direct our audience there. But in terms of the actual games that you would maybe do with your office or do with your coworkers or do with your group of friends, our audience, again, is constantly on the outside of that looking in. And so we are We launched it, I want to say 3 years ago now, and it's been really cool to see people engage with it. And we're currently working on some updates there. Fantasy down the line would be wicked to be able to do. We don't know if that makes sense for us, just with some of the technology there. That's very much required on a player by player perspective. And so where we've really focused is more of the day-to-day games that you can play, or beginning of playoffs or beginning of a tournament.
So like, and again, we're heading into an area I don't know very well, but let's say like March Madness, you'll be like, okay, the GIST fandom, we're going to create our own bracket and we're going to have you all compete with each other. Go sign up with your username and email address and fill out your bracket. And at the end of this, we'll produce a ranking or something like that of which of you were, where you ranked against all the other fans or something like that.
Yeah, exactly that. And then we create an ecosystem of content around it. So we're able to kind of talk about who still has a perfect bracket, how to fill out your bracket, what matters with March Madness. And what's really cool is that the early data that we have from our audience is that they're more likely to continue watching and engaging with a sport when they filled out a bracket, even if their favorite team falls off. And so I think that's really interesting as well for us to ensure that we're getting continued engagement throughout those points, but also for some of our partners that are the broadcast partners, or that are the leagues, us being able to show that we can influence fandom and influence fan behavior is pretty cool.
So tell me about the podcast strategy. I know you're one of the co-hosts for the podcast, but I also noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't look like you have a video version of it.
We need to.
Yeah. So tell me, when did the podcast launch, and what's kind of the strategy or how it fits into the GIST as a larger media company?
The podcast launched in February 2020, really based off of audience feedback. We were constantly being asked, hey, do you have a podcast? Hey, do you have a podcast? Are you guys going to launch a podcast? And we got enough of that feedback and had enough data to say, okay, it's time for us to launch a podcast. Again, February 2020, not a great time to be launching a podcast when the world kind of shut down from a sports perspective after that. But we've been hosting the gist of it since February 2020. Initially started as a weekly podcast. My co-host is one of my best friends, Stephanie Rotz, and we really give the gist of what's going on in sports. We cover everything from league previews all the way to the messy middle of what's going on in sports and some of those topics and dramas that some other folks tend to stay away from. Again, equal coverage on men's and women's sports. It now comes out twice a week. It's not on video right now, Simon. We need to have it on video. So I think that's just, we need to do it. Early days in 2020 and stuff, like most people weren't putting their podcasts online. It was more so quotes and things like that. We'll do short form video right now to promote the podcast, but definitely this year we'll be getting it up. And I think that there's, it hasn't fully been a true focus of ours as we've been focusing on some of these other channels, including the newsletter, including social, but really seeing the podcast as a place where some of our most diehard engaged gisters are listening. And so now we're thinking about, again, okay, how can we level up the gist of it? How can we refine our strategy? How can we ensure that the product is as good as possible, but also, where do we go from here in terms of original shows? We've been doing the same one for 5 years. I think it's time to add some more. We're finally at that place where it probably makes sense to do so. And so we're at a really exciting, I think, inflection point of the business where we're thinking about this, these original shows and IP a lot more.
So is there a lot of advertising demand for the podcast, or do you view it more as like a brand building opportunity at this point?
There is a decent amount of interest from an advertising perspective. For the most part, what we're doing is creating 360 programming for our partners. And so when they are working with us, you'll be able to see them across the newsletter, social, as well as podcast. And then we supplement that in a similar way as we were talking about CPC here and there. We'll supplement with programmatic.
So I saw on Instagram and TikTok you have a few 100,000 followers a piece on both of those. One thing I'm increasingly asked my guests is like, what is the kind of business opportunity there? A lot of them just say it's just a brand building opportunity. It's building trust. It's kind of thinking of TikTok and Instagram as kind of top of funnel entryway into the more lucrative thing, whatever it is in your case, the newsletter. How do you think about TikTok? So I notice it's or Instagram and TikTok and social media in general. I notice like some of it's kind of just like someone appearing on camera, like standard TikTok style, and explaining like a piece of news. Other like with TikTok or Instagram, you're using like the carousel function to basically break an article up into its core components to explain something new with news. Like, how do you think of that as it contributes to your business? Is there like a lot of demand from advertisers to do sponsored posts, or is this purely like a top of funnel play for the newsletter?
We have a ton of demand, which is really exciting. So altogether on socials right now, I think across TikTok, and then we have a couple of accounts on Instagram, we're close to 750,000 followers at the moment. And the way that we see social, Simon, is really that it is our product and that it is an extension. We think that there's our audience is represented in different ways across social, across the newsletter, and then across podcasts, and then who shows up to IRL events or who joins our community, which is called the Gist Plus. And our social audience is probably a little, it ranges from more of a casual fan all the way to an avid fan. But again, thinking about our audience, which is young, on the go, zillennial women, where are they engaging constantly every day? That's their email and that's their social media. And so immediately for us, we went, okay, that's also our product. And so we have been monetizing our social since day one. It represents a large part of our revenue. And so you'll see us create content that is of value to our audience that will just live on social. You'll see us create content that will hopefully drive subscribers to our newsletter and to our podcast, and you see it as an engine. But you'll also see that we work with a lot of brands, again, amplifying what we're doing there, justifying some on IRL coverage that we might be having. And so it really is, I think, for us, a community driver as well as a revenue driver.
And as you grow, how much do you think about verticalizing into individual sports versus keeping a brand that kind of covers a broad spread of sports?
We think about it a lot. I don't know exactly what the right strategy is there and what we're going to do. Right now, our audience is responding to something that is a little bit more breadth, and they can come in for those specific seasons. I think the hard part, again, with sports is that if you're a diehard WNBA fan, okay, that's amazing. We could talk to you from May to October, but actually I want to talk to you for the entire year. And so thankfully there's off season, but if you're looking at the NFL, we don't want someone just coming in September to February. Like, we want you to be able to engage with the Gist further. And so a part of our job has been, okay, you might be coming in for one sport, but how can we help you fall in love with these other sports or enjoy these other sports so that you're within our ecosystem 365 days a year? Will it stay like that always? Not sure. I think social is also so different right now, Simon, in that in the early days of TikTok and Instagram, it was really easy to grow a page. You were getting sometimes 1,000 followers a day. It was so easy. That's not the way that it works now because both are so saturated. And so growing a new page is a lot harder than what it used to be. So there's some of those, I think, real kind of barriers that we also have to think about when launching for specific sports.
So tell me about the community, because it is a paid subscription from what I can tell, and the main offering, even though there might be some paywalled content, it seems to be access to the community is the main draw. When did you launch that, and how do you kind of market that community?
Yes, so we launched it's very much still in its MVP stage, I would say. So we launched our MVP last October, and really saw that Gisters were coming to it for the Discord. Again, I think what a lot of what we learned from our audience is that when things are happening in sports, they don't necessarily always have a friend or family member that they feel like they can text about it or talk to with. And so we really wanted to take this amazing community that we had created online through the newsletter and through social and say, hey, there's a safe space here for you to be able to chat with your friends. And so on our Discord, we're talking about everything from what happened over the All-Star weekend and some WNBA tea and drama. We're talking about, okay, who's actually going to win the Super Bowl? What do you think about the halftime show? What do we think about the FIFA World Cup? all the way to, okay, what books is everybody reading? What shows are you watching right now? What are you enjoying? And it has been, at least for me, it's now become my de facto place where I want to talk to someone about sports. I don't open up my phone and try to find someone who might be interested. I immediately go to the Discord and start a conversation with our gisters there. And so it's been really cool to see that that's what people have been most interested in. I think there's still a lot of opportunity for us to iterate on that product, improve that product, think about what's next there. And also leverage that audience as an audience that can review some of these new things that we're wanting to be doing and being like, yeah, that rocks, or that like sucks, don't do that. And so I think that there's different ways in which they also add value to the business outside of just being a part of the Just Plus.
I'll admit I don't have like a lot of familiarity with Discord. The few times I have gone into a Discord, I've been like immediately repelled because it just seems like chaos to me in terms of like how fast text is moving and trying to latch on to like what is the actually like going on here. It seems like a lot of people having discussion at once. Why did you pick that versus like something that's a little bit more structured, like a circle or something like that, where there are like more structured threads? Or what was your thinking with Discord?
We asked our audience. I felt the same way. I was like, I don't know if Discord's it. Maybe it's Slack. Maybe it's Circle. Maybe it's a massive WhatsApp group. I don't know. But we asked our audience a few times, and far and away what they were most interested in is Discord. And when you look at the overall users of Discord, it does skew younger. And I think a big thing with a lot of folks these days, and that we're all seeing, is that app downloads are trending down. And so for us, it was really important to have this community hosted on an app where our gisters likely already have a download and have some sort of familiarity. It ended up coming down to between Discord and Slack for us. And what a lot of our audience said was essentially Slack is for work, and they didn't want this community to feel like it was for work. And so the way that the community exists right now and those conversations exist right now, Discord makes sense as a platform.
And what's the strategy in terms of kind of directing the flow of conversation? Like, is it kind of a free-for-all where the members are just kind of picking what they talk about, or is there some kind of structured system within the gist of there's some kind of dedicated staff member in there interacting with them and trying to do certain things to generate certain kinds of conversations that might, like, things you might read off, like question, like Q&A for the podcast, or like different stuff like that, or like maybe stuff that's curated even in the newsletter, like really insightful comments, or I don't know.
It is majority free flowing, which is really fun to see. Our audience is so smart, so passionate. They want to figure things out. And then we do have a program lead who's in charge of the Just Plus, and she'll pop in, I'll pop in. But again, I'm doing it from a really authentic place. Like, I want to chat with these people and hear what they're speaking about, hear what's going on. And so there is some of that facilitation, but really I think the magic is in them having a place where they feel like they're the ones in the driver's seat. We have created channels because they've asked for it. We have created new products because they have asked for it within this Discord. And so that's really cool. I think one of the most fun parts of it, Simon, is when our gisters in the Just Plus share photos of each other meeting up at events, or they're chatting online and they're like, hey, I'm randomly going to be in Denver. Who are the folks here? I'm going to a Denver Summit NWSL game. Who wants to come? Those moments just make us so happy and are part of what we're trying to do.
And what's the pricing for the community?
We have two different tiers. We have a $5 tier and then a $10 tier. $10 tier. So we have rookie as well as all-star, and they get different perks. So there's different content that they receive. And then we are also partnered with a bunch of different men's and women's sports teams. So the New York Giants, Colorado Avalanche, Gotham FC, and the NWSL, just to name a few, that provide our audience with discounts and access to different types of things. And the highest tier has that. Will those be the tiers forever? I don't know. But that's what we launched with.
And how do you promote the community? Is it just a call to action in the newsletter, or are there any other things that you can do to kind of promote the membership?
To date, we've only been using our newsletter. I think we have just been using our own ecosystem for now, as we're trying to figure out, is the product actually what our audience wants? Is the pricing what they want? What does this actually look like? And so right now we've been using our own ecosystem. As we start to evolve and iterate and I think improve our product, that's when we'll start to potentially branch out of our own ecosystem. That's been, though, coming back to the newsletter, one of the things that we've done really intentionally, because even when you think about the Gist Plus or future content that we're creating, anything like that, we have this built-in distribution network of over 1 million subscribers whose emails they have signed up to say, yes, the Gist can email me. And we have this really amazing one-to-one relationship with them. And so that's where the power of the newsletter comes back in when we're thinking about distributing all of this different type of content or marketing what we're doing.
So today, how large is the staff for the Gist and how's it structured roughly?
Yeah, so right now we have I'm trying to think of just some backfill. I'd say right now we have between 25 to 30 folks if we're including some of the people and adding up some of our part-timers as well, editors, freelancers, etc. And we have it organized in broadly 3 different areas. So we have the content and editorial side of things who also execute on our branded content. We have the revenue and partnership side of things. And then we have our marketing, operations, finance, technology. So let's call it operations that are essentially supporting everything else. So
when you look ahead like 2 to 3 years from now, what do you want to be investing in? What do you want to be doing then that you're not doing now? Could you see yourself hiring like beat reporters? Do you want to have more, like you talked about, you want to get into like video podcasts? Do you want to like launch a whole podcast network? Obviously there's like a lot of talk now around like athletes becoming media companies and like, there's like Blue Wire and stuff like that that's launching like these athlete led podcasts. Where do you see the expansion opportunity?
Oh my gosh. There's so much opportunity, and everything that you just listed, I'm like a kid in a candy shop. Like I want to do it all, but I know that it doesn't make sense from a business perspective for us to do it all, even if we want to. And so essentially, ultimately, our vision is to become the go-to source for sports for underserved sports fans. We want to be a household name for our audience, and we want people to think sports and think the Gist in whatever way that looks like will evolve over the years. I think that there's a few opportunities for us to level up on what we're doing existing. And so what we're doing existing right now, I think with our newsletter and social and podcast is good, but I think we can make it great. And so we're focusing on improving all of those products. I think there are two swim lanes essentially that we're thinking about moving into. A big reason why we founded the Gist as well was because there weren't enough women working in sports, and we really felt like that needed to change if the rest of the ecosystem was going to change. We have a women's sports business newsletter. And so we're really thinking about how that should evolve, how that can evolve, how can we help change the face of the industry. And so what that exactly looks like, still TBD, but we have something hopefully launching in October or November that we're really excited about. That's going to be focusing on the corporate side of sports, I guess you could say. And then the other space that we are really excited about is the show front, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a social first show, whether it's just a YouTube show. There's opportunity there, and we know that our audience is really into it. Again, what that exactly looks like and when that exactly happens, we are not sure. We also recognize that we haven't raised money since 2021. We are really working off of our own revenue and having to place our own bets. And so we're constantly thinking about, okay, which ones can we bet on that we feel like we're going to be able to monetize that then can allow us to bet in that next thing. And so what you see in the Gist today, I feel like is just scratching the surface. I'm so excited to see the changes that we'll have as a business in the next 12 to 24 months in particular.
So I see a lot of companies, like they kind of go one of two tracks. They go either the brand is paramount and we're just going to focus on everybody serving the brand, and then other ones that kind of try to build personal brands, like what you would call talent, like, but building up, like, you think of ESPN, like the Stephen Smiths or the Pat McAfee's type of thing. Do you see yourself ever becoming like a talent forward type of media company, or do you think like for the most part, like everything should serve the main brand?
You're asking such good questions. I think that's a question that we have right now. Right now, all of our content has really come up to serving the brand, and we really have created the Gist voice, the Gist identity. People know who we are. Gisters who get it. They love the brand. I think a question for us right now is that I think scales in how the Gist exists currently, but will that continue to serve us, and will that continue to serve our audience if we want to continue the rocket ship that is the Gist? And if we want to take things to the next level, where does that mean we need to go? And so things that are on our mind are creators, are athletes, are how are we changing our reporting, some of that sort of stuff as well, while also recognizing there's already incredible people in this ecosystem like Shams. Like, we're never going to be able to do what ESPN does, and like, nor should we. And so I think that there's us really defining the lanes that we're going to be in, and really defining how we're going to enter those lanes in the future, that are really key.
Okay, Ellen, those were all the questions I have for you. Where can people find you online?
You can follow The Gist on Instagram at The Gist USA or at The Gist CA if you happen to be Canadian. You can subscribe to our newsletter at thegistsports.com, and you can listen to our podcast wherever you stream podcasts. It's called The Gist of It.
Awesome. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much, Simon.